All right, so I see that we have a full house now. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. First, would just like to say to everyone, thank you again for attending. Um, we hope that you get a chance to really enjoy this discussion about the intersection of human trafficking and workforce. My name is Amber Ridgway. I'm the executive assistant for Midwest Urban Strategies. I'm also joined by my colleague today, Laura Heller, who is the director of operations for MUS. And so we'll go ahead and get started. Um, First, we'll get into a welcome. And then I'll begin by introducing our panelists who all are very passionate and involved in everything related to this fight against human trafficking, and also making it part of their mission to um, address this issue and also to spread awareness about this issue. We're going to start with a few housekeeping items first, though. So we have muted you just so that we don't want to have any interruptions during our discussion. If you would like to speak or ask questions throughout, you are more than welcome to. We just ask that for when the panelists are speaking or we're speaking, that you just make sure to mute yourself. But at any time, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. And also, if you have questions and maybe you don't want to address them openly, you can use the chat function to ask them too, and Laura will be grabbing those questions so that we can make sure that we address those if you have any. So, human trafficking is something that impacts two of the major groups that we see that we work with in workforce. We talking about the employers, and we also talk about the job seekers. As we learned today, victims of human trafficking, it crosses all racial, ethnic, socioeconomic backgrounds. There is no one target group. And so what you'll see today are the panelists also defining what human trafficking is, breaking down some of those misconceptions that we have about human trafficking. And you'll also be learning today, so where does the workforce fit in that? And we'll be breaking down those different dynamics throughout the discussion. Um, these individuals, those that have been trafficked, they begin the difficult process of surviving beyond their trafficking experience, and they come into the workforce system. And because of the nature of their experiences and what they've been through, this can be returning to the workforce. We find it can be a difficult and also traumatic process for them to go into. So we want to help you and provide you with the tools and resources to help each of these job seekers to achieve their goals as a core intention of the workforce system. To accomplish this goal, we must meet people where they are with understanding, compassion, and appropriate resources. We hope that at the end of today's conversation, you will have a better understanding of this issue and how you connect the resources in your community to help those that have been involved in human trafficking. And as you'll see here, human trafficking is something that impacts all sectors. So we can see these connections, whether it's in manufacturing, technology, hospitality, construction, government, healthcare. It goes across all sectors. And what we find even with human trafficking is sometimes it's right in our faces, it's in broad daylight. So I will get to today's speakers. So we have Alora Ellsworth. She is a partner at Jones Day, which is a law firm. She also is the vice chair for one of our board members at Partner for Work. And Jones Day has this as human trafficking as one of their premier initiatives that they really do work down and address. And so this Zoominar and this being one of the ones that we wanted to target really started with her and addressing her own board to let them know about the importance that work needs to begin to be done around addressing this issue. So Laura, if you want to add some more, just to introduce yourself to everyone that's here.
No, that was great, Amber. I don't have a lot to add about myself, but let me just add my thanks to those of Amber for all of you for participating in this program today, because one of the biggest challenges that we face as a workforce system nationally is that too few people understand what human trafficking really is and understand that it exists in their communities. And so we'll all have an opportunity to talk about that today. But understanding that the problem exists is the first order of business, and you guys are taking an important step in devoting time to this today. So thank you for that. Thanks, Amber.
Thank you, Laura. Next up, we have Nancy Yarbo Banks. Nancy herself is a survivor of human trafficking and has gone on to find her own organization, Fresh Start Learning Incorporated, and has made it her mission and part of her agency's mission to help other individuals who have been involved in human trafficking to give them a fresh start in life and kind of navigating them through reestablishing themselves. So Nancy, if you want to go ahead, and if you got anything else that you wanted to add.
Good morning, everyone. That was a good intro. Yes, I am the founder and executive director of a nonprofit organization who solely exists to break down some of those myths, misconceptions, and mysteries that happen behind people being exploited and how that looks when you start to make the intersection back into the workforce. So I'm looking forward to joining in on this conversation, shedding some light on some things that might not be standoutish to most people, but definitely enjoying the fact that we are having it. So thank you for inviting me out.
Absolutely, and thank you. Next up, we have Dana, who is the founder and executive director of Foundations for Freedom. Dana, if you want to give a little bit information about you. And apologies, everyone, just having a couple technical difficulties.
No worries. Thank you so much. I am Dana World Patterson, the founder and executive director of Foundations for Freedom, Inc. We exist to strengthen women and girls. I've been doing it for 30 plus years. I've had the opportunity to strengthen women and girls. I've been on the trajectory of eradicating human trafficking for 12. Started as the founder of the County Human Trafficking Task Force. I was asked to then, when it sunset, asked to become the chairperson of the Human Trafficking Task Force of Greater Milwaukee. And so every month, except for COVID, we've had the opportunity and the pleasure of meeting and just cracking the nut and learning as much as we can about human trafficking and how we can get those who have been affected by it back to a place where they're thriving. It has been a journey as we've learned bit by bit. I said, it's salacious enough. We don't need to add to anything. Let's just take the facts. So it's a pleasure to be here and to share what I know so far. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that, Dana.
No worries.
Laura, I want to start with you. What brought you, or how did you begin to start to learn about human trafficking? Like, what connected you to want to explore more about this?
Now I'm unmuted. A couple of things that brought me to this. One of them was a personal situation where a friend of mine had a daughter who was lured literally out of her upstairs second floor bedroom into trafficking by online people who were stalking her. She ultimately developed a drug addiction and lived for years in a trafficked situation and was ultimately rescued and is now doing well. But that was a very personal experience and one that led me to understand that this is not somebody else's problem. This is everybody's problem. And the other thing is the work that I do around the world. So for Jones Day, my official title is Partner in Charge of Community Service Initiatives. In that work, I lead 2,500 lawyers in 43 offices on 5 continents around the world. And one of the things we were looking for was a project that could unite all of those offices and all of those lawyers in a common project where we could really make a difference. And the obvious target was human trafficking. And that was true for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is a crime that exists across the world in every jurisdiction and every country. It is one that affects many of our clients. Jones Day represents the Fortune 500 companies and hundreds of companies throughout the world. And as we'll talk about a little here, their operations are all affected or at risk because of human trafficking. And the third is that I was married to a prosecutor for 30 years. I'm still married to him. And came to know some of the people that became involved in his cases as witnesses. Many of them had been trafficked, and many of them were extraordinary people who I did not see having the services or support in the legal system that I thought was appropriate. And so one of the other things that Jones Day has done is done work in setting up some diversionary courts for who come into the justice system because they were involved in trafficking. And rather than treating them as the criminal, they are recognized as being the victim who they are. Because fundamentally, from a legal standpoint, human trafficking is a crime of exploitation. Nancy's word was exactly right. It is a crime of exploitation. And the official definition of human trafficking is something that arises out of something called the Palermo Protocol, which the UN passed. And the essence of that is that the conduct of the person, of the victim, has to involve force, fraud, or coercion. Some aspect of force, fraud, or coercion that has been exerted to exploit that person. And if you could go to the next slide for a second, those principles manifest themselves in different kinds of human trafficking. Really two big categories. One is labor trafficking. There are several kinds of labor trafficking. I'll just go through this really quickly. Supply chain. So to use an example, cobalt, as you may all know, is an essential ingredient in any electronic product. Vast majority of cobalt in the world comes out of the Congo. And in the Congo, a majority of it is mined by child laborers who are working under slave conditions. They're not being paid. In many cases, they're being physically abused or imprisoned. And there has been, and there are currently, a number of lawsuits that have been brought around the world, including against organizations like Apple, all of the platform companies, electronics companies, anything that has an electronic component, saying that those companies are liable for participation in human trafficking because somewhere in their supply chain was this incidence of modern day slavery or human trafficking. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that kind of liability rolls up to companies, but even companies who don't want it in their supply chain, who've done a lot of things to keep it out of their supply chain, still have it in their supply chain. And so for anybody who's on this call that runs a business or operates a business, this is a subject that you need to know for your own sake, as well as understanding that that kind of behavior is labor trafficking. Other kinds of trafficking are when people come to the United States, they pay to come to the United States, they pay someone to come here, and then basically get into a situation where they have to pay that person back all their wages. And live in filth, they're paid nothing, they get no money, and it just becomes this perpetual paying that person back. And they are effectively modern day slaves sitting right here in the middle of the United States. And there are instances that time doesn't permit that happen within US states where that very situation existed. Sex trafficking, which we're going to talk about here, the kind of trafficking that most people know about is prostitution. There is also child sexual exploitation, and in particular, online child sexual exploitation. And this is in situations where there are people who go out and hunt for children online. And then they go to figure out what school they go to. And then they go online and figure out what time that school lets out. And then they go and they hunt for that child. And see that kind of content of conduct going on. And then those children get into a trafficked situation. There is also a kind of sex trafficking called live streaming, where you will have a child typically in the Philippines or in Southeast Asia who is being abused online with people watching from around the world who can order in real time what they want done to the child and then pay with electronic currencies of various kinds. So all of these kinds of behaviors go on, and I will again say that some of the people who are watching and participating in live streaming content are sitting in the states represented by the people in this call. And so to understand that a lot of these behaviors that you might not have understood where human trafficking go on in your jurisdiction is a step to figuring out how we can identify the victims of these schemes and can help them restore their lives and get away from the people who have been exploiting them.
Yes. And I think one thing to add into with hopefully what people can take away from this discussion today is understanding the intentionality of the way that human trafficking is set up is the fact that it's stealth, and its purpose is to be able to blend in, to go unnoticed, and why it's so widespread and why we see all of these definitions, because it goes across all populations. We mean when it's different socioeconomic backgrounds, and we're talking about, we see it in the rural and in the metro areas. So thank you for those definitions. Nancy, if you could share with us your story about being trafficked, and then also just following up with, how do you define trafficking, human trafficking?
Okay, I didn't know I was on here to do that. Okay, anyway, so no.
Well, the portion that you want to. So
no,
just,
I'm totally fine. I just prepared some. Anyway, here we go. Always be ready, right? So the thing is that what I wanted to bring to the light is that anybody can be lured in by curiosity, vulnerabilities, and need to feel loved and accepted. And that love and acceptance comes from whatever mainstream you happen to be in. Me, myself, was born in a 2-family home. I didn't have any need to do the things that I end up being lured into. But as a child, curiosity is there. We have to take ourselves back to when we were children and how we interacted, and start learning our body parts, and start learning how to identify with sexual behavior, or how it was introduced to you. So for me, the first thing that hit trauma for me that was unresolved was my parents getting divorced. So when that happened, there's an open door to vulnerability, because inside of the house now, the next young man that's in the house, which I had one brother, became the man of the house. Well, nobody taught him how to be a man, so therefore he utilized his authority, or usurped his authority over me in ways for me to please him, so that I didn't get beat up by him. I wasn't, my things weren't taken away. So automatically I'm being groomed into the, if I do this, you do that kind of thing, which normally ends up happening for those that end up saying yes when they should have said no. So I always like to start with this part: never cookie cutter. Everybody's journey is not the same. It is when that vulnerable moment may have happened, when somebody asks you to join in on something that you didn't seem to be strange. After having a life of abuse, mentally, physically, having my virginity taken away through a rape, so not knowing what that love connection was, and then being presented with the gateway of drugs and alcohol at a very young age, allowed me to say yes when I should have said no because I was taught better. So it's not the more so of the parent or the community's fault at risk all the time. It's some of the things that ends up happening when you're alone in vulnerabilities. And somebody says, well, it's better for you to be paid than for you to be broke. You know, so you might as well join the team. At that point, I'm looking for somebody to take me in, looking for somebody to say, hey, this is the way of life, and this is how you could be a productive person in society. Because we're talking about jobs, it's considered a job. You know, whether people realize it or not, it is your life. And that's why we always utilize that coin phrase, like a life for a life, you know, exchanging your life for something else. So the reason why I do what I do, and the reason why my son calls me the modern day Harriet Tubman, is because I really believe that going back out to the same places that you were held captive in bondage, you go back out to show people the way out. So my fight is every day to make sure people understand that on the other side of that life, it is another life. There is something that you can do. You can turn your pain into power. Your purpose is awaiting you, and being there for those doable steps. So what we offer is what's called the SOS program, which is called Sisters of Survival. So we intentionally hire survivors that's coming out of whatever diverse, unresolved trauma they happen to be in. And at that point, we want to make sure that we're offering opportunity for them to come in and learn what the resume building, how to produce for an interview, how to negotiate salary, what to do in different cases, how to even dress up, how to talk, how to articulate, all those things, what fits. You know, it's not us placing them somewhere, but it's us asking them, what have you always wanted to do? You know, somebody happened to ask me that. I had no idea. So I'm very grateful. I apologize. I have furniture being delivered, and I think this is them calling. Let me put this on mute. I'll pass it to my very, very good friend that can take it from here. Dana, if you can just kind of jump in, and I'll be back. I apologize.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, Dana, if you could share from your perspective, being someone that actively works and engages in the community and also with major stakeholders in different areas and in different parts of the workforce system and just in the governmental areas, how would you define human trafficking?
I'm happy to define human trafficking. Human trafficking is a crime. It's modern day slavery. Again, where force, fraud, and coercion are used to persuade a person to provide a commercial sex act. Now, what does that mean? If we break that down, many of us are familiar, and I'm sure we're familiar with prostitution. So, from the text of sex trafficking, we're familiar with prostitution. There is a splitting of the hair when it comes to not simple prostitution, but prostitution and human trafficking. You must have the element of force, fraud, and coercion. For a person that's over 18. If you're under 18, then there is no need to have the proof of force, fraud, and coercion, because we understand that children are not, having sex with a child is a crime. 13 being the average age that girls are trafficked domestically. So think about a 10-year-old, 11, 12-year-old being forced daily to have sex. And then the numbers internationally are even lower. So it's the force, fraud, and coercion. It's the exchange of sex for money. People understand pimping. Individuals understand hoeing. That's what we hear on the street. As we talk about it, human trafficking, it's more of an intra-office term. Because on the street, they're not talking about, yes, you know, I'm experiencing this or that. They're talking about pimping and hoeing. And pardon my French, as you learn more about human trafficking, we'll all see that it is a grimy subject, and there's nothing good about it at all. But I absolutely love the fact that individuals that were vulnerable at one time, and my connection to it, no, I have not exchanged sex for money in this way, but I have identified with being vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And many of us, so when we talk about the statistics and we talk about what we know anecdotally, we've also connected with individuals who have lived this life.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is the wind beneath my wings, seeing individuals move from victim through a space of surviving. And I like that, I want that survival space to be short and
Mm-hmm.
small, because there's still a lot of vulnerability there as we move to a place of thriving, which, I mean, this having a conversation with individuals that provide employment is on my bucket list,
Mm-hmm.
because the opportunity that individuals have in the workforce to understand human trafficking, and then to also create policies and procedures so the individuals don't have to lead with their story, because they
Mm-hmm.
already understand what's going on. They
Mm-hmm.
understand the nuances, and they don't have to repeat their past over and over and over. There's a young
Mm-hmm.
lady, that a woman that we're working with, she is brilliant. But when
Mm-hmm.
you look at her resume, she's like, Ms. Dane, I can't even get a job at Walmart. Why? Because people expect them to lead with their past. So
Mm-hmm.
while we're working on getting rid of the prickly stuff, you know, that
Mm-hmm.
shows up from survival of being on the street, or
Mm-hmm.
having to, the disassociation that comes with having to deal with 10 to 15 people a day, staying
Mm-hmm.
out there until you get your money, so on and so forth, while we're working with individuals so that they can show up different. When you hand that, when they have to share their resume, it says something different. So this
Mm-hmm.
is a very, very important conversation. And I'm glad, and I'm very thankful that we have the opportunity to engage with thought leaders who are on the other side. In addition, the opportunity that our guests have is in being change agents. If
Mm-hmm.
we can provide gainful employment that will take the monkey off of the individual's backs, so
Mm-hmm.
that they no longer have to think about how to survive, but really dwelling in a place of assimilation and being their best self, operating without having to lead with their story, this is a great place to be. So thank you again. Remember, force, fraud, and coercion.
All right.
And
Thank you,
if I could,
Dana.
Amber, if I could just echo one thing that Dana said so beautifully.
Sure.
Many times, people don't know that they have been victims of human trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
They just got into a bad relationship, or that something just bad happened in their lives. And a lot of what the workforce system, I believe, needs to do is to find ways to identify people who have in fact been victims of trafficking and
Mm-hmm.
deal with them accordingly. And the other thing I will share, because we do a lot of work with survivors and connecting survivors to workforce programs, the fundamental aspect of the crime being this very subtle, in some cases, force and coercion. And I thought Dana raised such a great point, when all of us have had those moments in our lives where you think back and you think, why on earth did I do that? How did that person convince me to do that? Or why did I think that was a good idea? The people who are doing the exploiting have this down to a fine science and exercise such brutal control over the people who are involved, so that those people who are able to choose that they want to have a different life have an enormous strength, an enormous character, an enormous ability to achieve great things, and a tenacity that is unlike many other employees. And so I think it's very important that the workforce system not think of survivors as, you know, how do I get this, you know, is this a damaged person? I think what we need to look at is we need to look at them as people who have incredibly positive attributes, and
Mm-hmm.
how to deal with the trauma, which we'll talk about later, because there are certain workplace things that need to be done to address the level of trauma that these people have lived through, but to also understand how valuable they are to the employment system and treat them accordingly.
All right, thank you for that.
Absolutely. They're just like you and I. You know, we've all experienced trauma, and I don't want to belabor this point, but when you think about hiring an individual that has experienced human trafficking, underneath the pain and the things that they experienced, they're people just like you and I that I absolutely love. And they want, who doesn't want to thrive? Everyone wants to thrive, but we needed someone to give us a hand out and a hand up, depending upon our situation. And many of the individuals are looking for a hand up, not a hand out. They know how to survive. They made it, and they're thankful that they're living at this point. So now the opportunity to be their best, education, I won't get ahead of myself, but they're just like you and I. It's not them and us, not at all.
Well, it's actually timely as we can go ahead and go into how do we talk about who let's talk about who is trafficked, and I think you've both kind of touched on that, and also defining what are some of the misconceptions about victims of human trafficking.
Can I chime in?
Oh, for sure.
I'm back. Okay, so I heard everything that was being said, and I'm glad that Dana, you end with not the them and us kind of mentality, because that is where we get off track a lot. Being able to have taught and teach different aspects of coming back into the workforce, but also putting the pro back into professionalism, and all kind of trainings that I have been able to create and design, and to help those that understand people that live through trauma or living through trauma or vicariously living through trauma. It is something that we need to really readjust our thinking to, have an open ear to be able to understand that could have been, potentially still could be me. I draw that line in the fact that most people that are pulled into any lifestyle of being exploited are people that believe that they're in a relationship, just like if anyone on the call happens to have a loved one, if they're married or have a significant other or somebody that they're really involved with, and how that dynamic of that relationship is, right? Anybody can be exploited, you know. And I think that when we put that word back there and put the vulnerable people, everybody has vulnerabilities, everybody has the need to feel loved and accepted, and everybody has a sense of curiosity. That's when we put us back into this conversation, and that way it keeps an open mind. Because if I jumped on this call and Amber had not led with Nancy as a survivor, would you have known? Do I look just like the other panelists? I've always was able to fit into a crowd of people that I was with, whether I was in middle school, high school, and in college, right? Going to job interviews. Nobody had an idea of my past. So my whole thing to bring into this conversation would be the intersectionality of how do we allow people that have had life traumas, whether it be exploitation or not, deem them employable? How do we make them have the ability to be employable and stay employed? And that's with anyone, that the revolving door that happens with employment is the heart condition. What do you want to be or aspire to be, right? Nobody set out to be a hoe. Nobody set out to be a pimp. Nobody set out to be a John. It happened in the course of their life. The curiosity of wanting someone else, the ability to make money off of someone else, and the ability to survive out in the street. So I just think that if we bring it back into a workforce development kind of mind frame, we'll be able to see that those that were out there in the street are definitely probably the best employable, because they're dependable, reliable, work hard, curious, want to know. It's just finding that niche, you know, and help them understand how to do that. So we actually employ 3 people right now that we're out in the street. So again, our SOS program is alive and well, because we want people to have the ability to come from that place to this place to the next place, but not because we said it, it's because they desire to do so. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay.
And
No
that's
problem.
critical. I would also add that victims of human trafficking can be any age, gender, race, religion, and social and socioeconomic background. It can be anyone. It's
Okay.
hidden in plain sight. So when we go back 12 years ago in Milwaukee, there were crickets. I mean, the idea of human trafficking, I was introduced to this sphere because of my work with women and girls. And Martha Love asked me if I was familiar with human trafficking. I had never heard the term. She said, "You need to come with me." That's when we founded the County Human Trafficking Task Force. We were learning and growing. The data at that time was that this was a $32 billion industry worldwide, but the narrative from paper to paper, individuals that were working with this was that this was an inner city Black girl, no father, poverty stricken problem. And so
Mhm.
Martha and I are scratching our heads thinking $32 billion worldwide. And the only narrative we hear is that this is an inner city Black girl, no father, poverty stricken, I added, eating flour and water problem.
Mhm.
So it's far greater than that. And you'll miss those who are hidden in plain sight if you stick with that narrative. Now,
Mhm.
should we indeed be mindful of the inner city, the Black girl, the poverty, so on and so forth? We also have to consider rural areas, so that we have to think broadly. And
Mhm.
if you stay within that simple narrative, you're going to miss those who um, a term that has been coined, in your backyard, hidden in
Mhm.
your own backyard. So please stay open that this can be anyone,
Mhm.
absolutely anyone. When I go into the suburbs of Milwaukee and I've had presentations at some of the more wealthier schools, their narratives can be laid right on top of the work that I do in the inner city.
Mhm.
Why? Because we're talking about vulnerable individuals. So it is very important to keep that open, that have an open mindset. And also knowing here in Milwaukee, when we started, crickets at first, and now we know that it is occurring in all 72 counties. That's
Mhm.
from awareness. That's because we continue to move things along and we learned and we were growing. All 72 counties, human trafficking has been identified in. And because those of you who are around the country, I want you not just to think about those who appear to be deprived, appear to be vulnerable, but also thinking outside of that realm.
Okay.
And there are two, for those of you, for example, who are in the medical field or the healthcare field. There's a lot of training that goes on that Jones Day does, that other organizations do, about how you can identify somebody when you're looking at them who might be being trafficked, the red flags of trafficking in a healthcare.
Mhm.
And I commend that to you. I'm happy to talk further about that with any of you. Similarly, financial institutions. There are
Mhm.
very identifiable red flags that you can see in your branches every day, or that you can see through your AMS systems or other kinds of, it's a money laundering crime, right? So you can see it through your regular money laundering systems, the indicia of human trafficking. In transportation, if you have a transportation organization, there's training that we do about what are the signs in the transportation field. And so one thing that I would really encourage people to do after this is to become expert in your field about how to identify trafficking in your field. And I'll tell you right now, it exists. And if you're not seeing it, it's because you don't know how to see it. And that additional kind of training for red flags could be really useful. And in doing that, one of the other things I suggest you might want to consider, in my field, when we're going into trial, we hire what are called expert witnesses. And these are people who have lived that particular topic so well that they really know it inside out, and they're qualified to testify as experts in trial. In this field, people who have been trafficked and who are survivors of trafficking are the expert witnesses. They
Mhm.
really know how it operates, what it's like, what it feels like, all of those things, they understand that better than anybody else. And in many cases, very valuable employees to businesses and organizations that are seeking to understand where and how trafficking exists in their business, in their community, in their field. And it's just another interesting employment opportunity to consider.
Okay. And then for the sake of time, Laura, I'm gonna let you briefly talk about some of the legal aspect on it, but once you wrap up, then we're gonna shift gears into, so what does this mean for the workforce board? Why is this important? And have our panelists to speak on things such as how do you engage someone who has been trafficked back into the workforce? What other additional services that you can provide for them and support. And then also for Laura too, to be able to speak to what kind of legal resources do they also need to be connected to, because there can be aspects of when you've been trafficked that kind of stay with you, kind of the same sort of things that we see with re-entry, where sometimes your criminal past can be a hindrance to you finding gainful and meaningful employment.
Right. So if I could just sort of take those in reverse order really quickly, some of the things that we do with survivors are expungements. So many times survivors will have, like their trafficker was filing tax returns in their name. So they've got tax returns, tax liability, taxes that they knew nothing about, or opened accounts in their name. So a lot of that kind of stuff. Sometimes there'll be a minor criminal violation that was attendant to the trafficking, and we'll do expungements there. Some of it is simply removing tattoos. In some of these cases, the trafficker will literally brand the people with their mark, their brand, as if they were cattle of some sort. And removing those is an incredibly important step toward healing. And so help in both legal ways and non-legal ways. Let me just do 30 seconds. I'll just do this really quick.
Okay.
The main law in the United States that addresses these issues right now is called the TVPA. And one thing that we haven't talked about yet is that under the law, there are criminal penalties for companies and personal executives that benefit financially from trafficking or do so in what's called reckless disregard that they have acknowledged. That is a different standard than you knew you were doing it. Is that you were in reckless disregard is less than you knew. It's that you really should have known. And so this kind of education of yourself about what human trafficking is and where it is a really, really important part, not just to do the morally right thing by human beings who need us, but also to be protective of companies that want to avoid liability. There are civil liabilities that are increasingly developing. And in that list that Amber showed at the beginning, there are cases against entities in all of those professions relate to trafficking, the inability of the company to identify or stop the trafficking. So this is a very real exposure to a lot of companies. And if you could flip through really quickly to the one with the map, Amber, just to take this forward. And we can make these slides if you guys want, yeah, to the actual map. Yeah. So Polaris is the national hotline where people can call to report incidents of trafficking. And it's a very imperfect system. It only captures a fraction of the trafficking that goes on. But look at that fraction. There were more than 1,600 people in the MUS footprint just last year alone. And top 25 cities nationally also fall within your footprint, and largely that's because of intersecting transportation routes. No surprises there. But this is an area where the people on this call have the opportunity, if you engage and become a part of helping solve this problem, you could make a huge difference to thousands and thousands of people who are there, who need you, and who will be incredible contributors to the workforce system and to all of our communities if we are simply aware and alert and design programming appropriately to facilitate that.
And just so everybody knows that all of these, as Laura's mentioned, all of these cities that we have bolded, these are all members of the MUS consortium. So it hits home definitely for us as far as those people that you might meet who have been trafficked, and that it is an issue in your area. So now that we've covered this background on human trafficking, and this is open to the panelists, so anyone can chime and jump in. When we talk about helping someone to return to the workforce, what are some things, and I'm speaking specifically to say, what are some things that like a case manager would need to know or understand to be able to begin to engage someone in the workforce who has been trafficked? What are some things that they need to be aware of, and what would that process look like? So it's open to any of the panelists.
I'll yield the floor to Nancy because she shared a wonderful story of when she first started and someone had to reach back and say, hang in there, girl. Do you remember that one, Nancy?
Absolutely. It's part of that journey, right? Getting back into the workforce, being able to say I want to exchange my life was one of the most difficult things, because you know that you have formidable schooling. I was very intelligent, avid reader, avid learner. That interruption in my life at 16 caused me to have, a different view about my life. Where would it go? What would I end up doing? Getting pregnant at 17, being fully addicted to crack cocaine and alcohol, then turning back around and getting that second win, the second chance, going back to school, learning what I missed for raising my children, learning all the nuances, but still sitting in the room with a lot of people feeling like I didn't fit. That fear would grip me every time that I would go in the room, because I would think that somebody could smell the fact that I used to be involved in, illicit activities. Got a job in early childhood education because I went to that field specifically because I wanted to know what it was that I missed raising my children. And I couldn't get the years back. So I was at a job, and I went in still struggling with life, getting my first paycheck, and all excited because hey, listen, I got a check that I've earned. I felt really good about it, opened it up, and they couldn't even pay my rent. Immediately, what I needed to do was to figure out how I'm going to make the other ends meet. So I instantly stormed out of the job. Everything else, all the high praises and esteem that I felt for myself took me right back to the place of why I didn't want to cross the line anyway. My supervisor at the time ran out behind me and said, what was the problem? I was crying and hollering and screaming like, I'm not doing this. And she was like, what's wrong? And I was like, my check is $50 short for paying my rent. She said, I'll give you that $50. In that moment, for her doing that to me, defined a whole nother concept of people and how they pour into you in your time of need. She didn't ask for anything in exchange. She saw something in me. She believed in me. We're still friends to this day. But she gave me another opportunity to know that I can do it. She stuck through with me through a lot of difficult times when I wanted to give up. And so that is why the thrust is in me to do the same thing for others, giving people an opportunity to come through our doors. And we hire people where all of a sudden they call in at the last minute, teaching them that responsibility and what that looks like. And are you having any triggered moments, and all those kind of things help me to identify when somebody did it for me to do it for other people. I did like the fact that you did mention the re-entry program, because I was working alongside a project here called Project Return, working with their women from recidivism, teaching them how to get back into the workforce and the field to do what was placed on their heart to do. And a lot of times the same thing come up with them, not feeling like they are employable, thinking that if their past actually comes up, they're gonna end up in that, that circular, folder, and not be able to have a job. So just helping people is what we do to navigate how to interview, how to fill out a resume, how to be able to empower oneself. We have a group called the Women's Empowerment Group for that very reason, because we wrap our arms around people that want to get back into the workforce. It is so important that we have people that go into places where you guys are the employers, and talk to you about what you might see coming through the door, and not necessarily pinpointing it on human trafficking or exploitation, but pinpointed on vulnerabilities and somebody new coming into a space that they've never navigated before. How do we walk with them to a place where they're able to now stand for themselves and turn back around and give somebody else that hope that can come through the door too. So it's each one teach one is so huge, so real, so important. And what we know can help somebody. What we don't know can hurt somebody. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation today about the importance of workforce development and what that looks like, and how we can actually help to train some of your staff, and all of your staff. If me and Dana, we'll go on the road, right? So just teaching people how to navigate that from the personal and professional aspects that both of us bring to the table, right? I think it's very important that we have those conversations before we start, really thinking we have a handle on it. It's so much more that we can explain in this limited time. But thank you.
But
For the
you
work,
explained it well, and I just wanted to just quickly say, even during the planning process, what Nancy was just referring to, it's like this is a two-way street for the person walking in, and then you as a workforce board. And what I mean by that is just how are your staff trained? Do they have good customer service skills as being the first face, being the first encounter? That somebody, when they walk through your doors, do they feel welcomed? Are you providing them with those resources up front? It's very critical. It could be a make or break, and just understanding that should be the standard across the board. So thank you for pointing that out. And sorry, Laura.
No, it's a great point. And I was going to say that a lot of what Nancy was describing will seem, I hope, familiar to the people on the workforce boards, because I think there is a lot of existing programming that we already do that with a little bit of sensitivity and adaptation can really, really be helpful on this issue. So a lot of what we do on trauma-informed care, a lot of what we do on soft skills building, a lot of what we do, oddly, on technology, because we've all heard stories of people who, when they sent an email, they didn't know they could send it to more than one person because they had been so directed to just deal with the person they were told to deal with. So just those basic kinds of systems can be very, very helpful to adapt to this population. But I'm just going to echo as well where the gating issue is having to recite your history and your past is something we have to fix, right? That has to be a non-issue. It has to be, let's just deal with the programs that we have, and if they belong in that program, they belong in that program. When job seekers come to us, they don't have to recite a long history of where all they've been, right? These folks that need to do it, and that's not fair. And so I think the other kinds of programs that are useful are some of the programs that we see with folks coming out of the incarceration, right? Because a lot of these folks will have expungement needs, or they'll have minor criminal histories, and some of those check the box kind of issues come up as well. So again, think about the programming you already have and think what can be adapted to trafficking survivors without having to have them relive and recite that whole history as the price of admission. That's one thing that we can and should change pretty soon. In terms of some of the questions that we're getting here about what other wraparound services are available, and we have some slides, and again, we can make these available to you. One of the things we see is that because in so many cases, the exploitation has been so profound and overwhelming and begins at such a young age in many cases, it does require long-term kinds of supports and unproductive support. So this isn't like you can have a 2-week course and you'll be fine forever, right? These are ongoing, multifaceted supports that are necessary. And we see this in a lot of our job-seeking population. It's not unique to this population. I do think it is important to connect to other people who provide these support services, some of whom you saw today, right? Like how awesome it would be to walk in and work with Dana and Nancy every day. I think it would be cool, right? They are the experts in the field, and they're there and they're willing to help and bring you the expertise that you need to help you adapt your existing programs. And again, I just want to emphasize, this is not a huge new invention for the workforce system. It is an adaptation that will allow you to bring thousands of people in who need to be in.
I agree. Yes, thank you for that. I agree. And then the comment saying it sounds like a human-centered approach. Absolutely. You're going to treat people the way you want to be treated. You're going to definitely have compassion. And as you lead out, it may not be empathy. You may not have been there, but how would you want to be treated? So when you look at the resume, going back to the case management and counseling, I think you definitely need someone that can, they're considerate. They don't necessarily have to have been a survivor, but they're considerate. And so instead of just throwing away the resume because you see the holes, you may, when you bring them in through case management, ask, what has work been like before? So that you can get them, have an open-ended conversation, or what has what has been difficult in the past, so that they can begin to share some of the things that you'll need to look for. I really like the idea of having a welcome and safe environment. Everyone, those are just basic skills. Also, unique needs of challenges that may need to be addressed. So those unique needs, a person doesn't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So if you're wanting someone to lead with what, or even share where they've been, even though you have their resume, if you're not showing up in a way that you care, you're going to get nothing. And who leads like that? It's like, the media putting in the beginning, the media would have a mic and it's like, okay, so tell me, how many times have you had sex? It's like, who does that? No one does that. So just having a sense of compassion and treating people the way you would want to be treated. So you're going to be dealing with many different things because the healing is a process. So yes, they want to work, but then they may be triggered. Some of the self-confidence, worth, value, there may be low education. If you left when you were 14, if you were trafficked at 14 and you came out at 22 or even at 19, you've missed all of your formative years. So low education, they may not fill out the application perfectly. Seeing behind that, fear, self-sabotage, addictions, mental health, stress, and anxiety, trauma. So we've lack of trust. So there are many things that the case manager will have to be mindful of, but I would like to employ you all not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. They're wanting to know, and that self-sabotage oftentimes with particularly the girls, and we see that in adults, they're going to poke a bit like, okay, are you going to kick me out now? Are you going to throw me away? Okay, how about this? What about that? Is this too much for you? Are you really here for me? So these pokes of self-sabotage are necessary when working with the case manager, where they are sensitive to know that this is what's going on.
I saw something here from Joanne that said, are individuals trafficked or formerly trafficked likely to reach out to the workforce systems for assistance? How does our system best connect to this available talent? Absolutely. The one here in Milwaukee, Employ Milwaukee, or Workforce Development, I actually went through that particular venue for a lot of assistance and support, but so did a lot of young ladies that I was working with and still work with today, especially through their teen programs and summer programs and things of that nature. It is people that want to do better, seek to do better, if they're given an opportunity to do better. You really can't expect anyone to know that something's available unless it's presented. So when I'm talking to the young ladies every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at these at-risk youth facilities that have been deemed traffic or runaways or chronic, chronic misbehavior in criminal systems, whether they were in gangs or however, I talk with them about what's called the Next Steps program. So I go in every week to talk with them about what's going to happen next, because there is a next. You'll be surprised about how many times they're asking about their fears, talking about their fears, but asking about what can they do in life that's productive, because the first thing they do is balance money and sense, right? And let me make sense of this. When people believe that they're saying, well, we can't really offer anybody $7.25 an hour, and they were making thousands, but guess what? Those thousands didn't go to them. So you can't offer them dignity in the job that they want to be able to get involved in. So it's mapping out what's realistic and never shooting them down when they say that. One girl told me she wanted to be a wrestler, a female wrestler. I didn't tell her, oh, you are so crazy. Well, let's talk about what that would look like. And then the steps that you would need to take. Is there anything else that you would like to do? Because your body will get a certain age and you're not able to maneuver the way that you used to if you want to be that. So I want to be a nail tech. I want to do cosmetology. I want to do, there's so much that's out there that they want to do, but just realistically letting them know the steps and doable steps that it's going to take. Always looking for a way out. When I was in, I always looked for a way out. I called it God's breadcrumbs of love that he had for me. Every time I turned around, somebody was telling me I did not fit in that environment. Why are you here? Why are you doing this? And I'm like, what else am I going to do? Until I found out that there was something else for me to do, and that people did care, and people would wrap around you, and people would help you roadmap. And when you pushed back, they didn't give up. And when you said you wanted to quit, they gave you space and came back, those kind of things. So it is definitely important for us to know that, again, people don't set out to have that as a lifestyle. It just happens to fit the life that they're in at the time.
And let me just throw in one other thought. I know we're short on time, Amber, but I think I saw from Nancy, peer counseling is incredibly important, I think, in this case. And to somehow build into your workforce system some sort of a peer counseling function, so that the people who you're working with can talk to somebody who is, their expert witness, who's really done this journey before and is living proof that they can make it through when it gets tough.
Yep, Lord, that's for sure. We definitely do that mentorship, crisis stabilization for families, one-on-one mentorship to those that have gone through or vicariously living through their younger sister's experience, because it's all needed, So that is what we pride ourselves on in Fresh Start. At least I do. I go out to make sure that people understand there is a way out. And what that looks like for you may not be in the same road that brought me in or out, but there is an exit point. When you're ready for it, let's walk you through that exit point. Like my dad used to always say, when you're talking to a baby that wants to trust you, and they're looking at you with their eyes wide open, and they have their hands out and they still have their sea legs, like, come on, baby, walk lonely, but when they get ready to fall, you're right there to catch them. And before they try it again, they're looking at you and say, should I try it? And you put your hand out and let them see that they can walk with some assistance. And you let go of their hand and you're there again. And then they trust you, and they're jetting trying to get to you because they know that you're going to catch them. That's the way that I feel, about those that I have the privilege to walk alongside. That when you can't walk alone, you won't walk lonely. But when you start to walk, I'm still there holding your hand. And when you're able to walk by yourself, then I'm still there supporting you. And you can't be an effective leader unless you're teaching people how to lead. So I am very grateful for lived experience, professional experience, and then, being able to pour that on to someone else so they understand how to deal with the population that we're talking about today, unresolved trauma, and how to resolve that.
Absolutely. When you consider the peer mentorship, in your case management, please still keep your hands in it, so that the individuals, the survivor leaders, are also healthy along the way, because it's a lot. you know, watching survivor leaders in this fear, on this trajectory, sometimes it becomes very weary. They become very weary. So please keep your eyes on them, even though they have the lived experience. For someone else that's strong and that understands, also walking alongside them or keeping an eye out, making sure that they're okay, is just as beneficial. So please just don't leave them there because they have the lived experience.
I think, and I'll make this comment and we got another question. Kind of two things that I'm hearing here are about the fact of when it comes to when you are dealing with someone, of being able to meet them where they're at. Don't just make assumptions, but let me meet you where you at. Let me start where you're at today and we'll work from there. But also about the importance of creating a safe place for them to be, but that, and also keeping them accountable by making sure, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, about making sure that you have good partnerships with your community-based organizations, meaning that you are able to give a soft handoff when they need to go to another place, of being able to have somebody that they can identify by name if they go to that place. So say that I need help with maybe assistance for rent. So I'm calling my local housing authority, and when I walk in, they told me to meet with Robert. Robert already knows a little bit about me. So, and I know a little bit about Robert, and being able to create that familiarity to make sure that you're keeping them engaged and also giving them somebody that they can actually talk to and engage with.
Absolutely. So, warm transfers. I was like, yes, she said it. Yeah, that's so essential. That warm transfer is so important because there, again, when Dana said about not making people relive, you know, their trauma, their fears, their insecurities, you know, if you already set up a connection with somebody else, our partnerships are so important. We have our hashtag called Stronger Together, because I truly believe that we're stronger together than we are apart. We can actually help more people when the person that's working in their sphere understands their role, and when you hand them off, it's a seamless effort. And having that first name basis and making sure that you, as the individual, like Fresh Start, we always call to make sure that that same person that we had the connection with is still there, because people go on, journeys happen, right? But making sure that we have that warm transfer for that person, so they don't feel as though when they come back in, they're being interrogated all over again, and setting them up to what expectations are. Because if you vetted the people that you're working with, then you understand how their systems are. If you know the mission and vision of those that you work with as collaborative partners, you can kind of explain to them what expectations will be when you get there, and also give them opportunity to go online and do some self-check themselves, teaching them how to be able to work in the systems, because when nobody's there, you're still there. When everybody is gone, you're still with yourself. What are you going to do when you're by yourself if you're not utilizing tools, you know, to help you? So that is important.
Okay, and one of the questions that we had come in was, what types of case management or counseling do workforce boards need within job centers and workforce systems to accommodate the population into the world of work? And so one-stops are usually the first interaction, even if the participant doesn't know it or a job seeker doesn't know it. It's the first interaction that they have with the workforce board. So what kind of services do workforce boards need to equip themselves with?
I think we've already covered a number of those programs and policies. So I think, you know, counseling services and the other things that we've talked about. One that we haven't talked about that I'll throw out, good, thank you for showing these. Wait, show them. Is find out the organizations in your communities that deal with this subject and can provide other services for survivors and work with them collaboratively. Also the judicial system, because the judicial system, both the adult system and the juvenile justice system, are often looking for places to refer survivors when they meet them. And so be sure that you form those links with people in an effective way. And here's sort of a throwdown to MUS and Amber. I know we need to wrap up because I'm getting to the end. We have long been looking for an opportunity to connect the survivor community with the national workforce system. And I have to shout out to Earl Buford, who I am privileged to work with here in Pittsburgh, who has really taken the idea and launched it to MUS. It is our hope that MUS is going to really embrace this issue and be a leader for the national workforce system. So to work here with some of the people you've seen on this call and others in your community to really develop best-in-class programming from a workforce standpoint, and then use what is happening from these boards at MUS and to take it more national so that we can really make a national impact on the workforce system and make it more open and accessible and effective for survivors of trafficking. So your participation here is not just for you and your community and your boards, but hopefully if we are able to work with you and use your expertise and the expertise of the other people on this call, we can build models that will improve this situation nationally. So thank you for being willing to embark on that. I'm warning you in advance, Earl is an incredibly effective and passionate person on these issues and all. And personally speaking, for our workforce board in Pittsburgh, we look forward to working with all of you to that end.
And Dana, could you speak to also where can workforce boards begin to use their voice to talk about this issue? And then we'll kind of wrap up with each of you just kind of sharing your final thoughts, and then leave at least some time to do a Q&A for people if they have questions.
I think it would be very important for workforce development to invite the community in to have the conversations. Learn as much as you can. Continue to learn, continue to learn, continue to learn, and then add on, bring in the experts. So that I think that be community minded. There's just being a part of this for 12 years, I'm so looking forward to how much more there is for me to learn. And I'm working with this every single day, seeing successes and seeing individuals go back out. So there's so much to learn. Become skilled in that area so that it will not throw you off as you're interacting with people. The more you learn, the more you'll see. That I know for sure. Things will be less hidden in plain sight as you become more open to the world of human trafficking and its nuances and how individuals operate. And as Nancy said earlier, there's no cookie cutter. So the more you know, the more equipped you'll be. And I think that's a great place to start. Bring people in, learn, learn, learn. And then admit that you don't know, so bringing people around you that can help you be better. And even as you're implementing processes and you're wanting to start today, bring someone alongside that knows a little bit more. That's where I would start, because then it's going to continue to open up. We started out with very limited knowledge, but we maxed out that knowledge that we gained. And then we added, then there was another intersection. Then there's LGBTQ. Then there's, the girls. Then there's, so you just continue to learn as you go along and really become an expert in those fields so that you can speak with facts. That's where I would start.
Okay. Any last thoughts that you want to share with the group?
Oh, it has indeed been a pleasure. One, working with these phenomenal panelists, working with MUS. And as I said, this is on my bucket list because the women that I serve, girls grow up to become women. And if they don't have the skills that they need when they have the mindset to work, then they're going to keep that monkey on their back. So with workforce development, having a clear path, treating individuals as humans, when they come in, they will not run. and then also a livable wage. It is important for the individuals to have livable wages. I'm constantly seeing how during COVID, the numbers didn't go down. You would think that who would want to be engaging with someone that could potentially have COVID, right? But the numbers increased. So those who were working, that were on a solid path, that were working, that were not essential, guess what? It triggered that monkey back on their backs. And so, you know, for some, it's that entry point, they say from 5 to 16 times of leaving and coming back before they're on solid ground. So there's still work to be done. But this is a no judgment zone. I get it. You still had to pay your rent, so on and so forth. And the demand was there. So if they went out, there was someone there to meet that need. So we have to have livable wages, welcome, and a safe place for them to come, understanding the nuances while holding their hands so that they can be great as well. Thank you.
Thank you. The important part about
we're here. This is what we do every day, is wind beneath our wings, and we want the workforces to be great. We don't want individuals to be triggered and turned away. We want them to be great, so we're here to help.
Yes. Stressing the importance of just advocacy, really putting the fire to your local representatives and your local politicians about being able to make those requests clear about the needs in your area. So very important piece. Nancy, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the group?
Yes. I'm just grateful to have this conversation. I always say that it's called, to me, kitchen table conversations, bringing it to the table family style, talking about the things that are uncomfortable but very necessary to talk about, the what, when, where, and hows, right? And then I also wanted to talk about just the genesis, the beginning of things and how that happens, you know, and we're at the genesis of this, you know, we're at the beginning of us actually collaborating in such a way that you understand that there is a fine line between work and want somebody's mind, you know, the ability to survive and the ability to make money for the essential things. Maslow's hierarchy of need doesn't change when you talk about food, clothes, and shelter. Is still always there on somebody's mind. So with us being the essential part of how do we get the people from one side of this type of work to this type of work is what we're talking about now. And I would like to leave with you guys too. This is a lot of information to take in at one time. And I would ask that you don't put so much on your plate that you can't enjoy the meal, but you just take it in bite-sized pieces where you can enjoy it before you go on to something else, you know? So because you had so much information thrust at you at one time, start picking those topics that make sense to your sphere of work, what you do, where you are, the city that you're in, so that you can ask people to come alongside of you to help you to navigate what that may look like. Again, I'm just open and available. This is definitely something I would love to stay a part of, being able to be that intricate part, the other side of the professional, again, and personal lived experience part of what does this look like? What should we be looking for? Where should we go next? And how do we keep people employed? So thank you guys for having me again.
Well, thank you. I just want to point out too, just about, you know, COVID being, having multiple agendas. And I think one of them is being able to shine a light back on your system, and you being able to address those gaps in your system and really kind of utilizing this time to maybe more streamline your services, see where you need to add in additional resources. So that is a critical point. And then we'll end with Laura. Do you have any last thoughts or comments you want to share with the group?
So I'll just share that working with the women on this call has just been such a complete privilege and such an honor. I think you all can see that for yourself. And these two are incredibly special, but many of the people that we encounter in this work everywhere are incredibly special. And I think it's because they are strong and resilient and proven, and are extraordinary people who will make extraordinary contributions to workforce systems and to communities. And I guess that's the word I would would leave with everybody. This is an incredible opportunity for us to build strong workforce systems, population that has been overlooked to that end. And the more we can help you identify them and bring them into the fold, the better we will all be.
Thank you guys for your comments. So we got about 8 minutes left. If you want to, we have the chat line open. So if you have questions, you can begin to type them in there and we can address them. So I'll give people just a few minutes to. I see one here that's talking about the trauma-informed care and about how could that be implemented into some of the best practices that boards could use. So it's up for anybody. The Q&A is up for any of the panelists to chime in.
So I'll just speak for ours. So we have trauma-informed care programs that are already in place for a variety of our populations who come out of trauma-based situations. And I think, as I said before, those are readily adaptable without a whole lot of cost, time, or additional personnel. So I think at many of the other organizations, I think, have similar programs already in place, which is a huge asset here. And one of the reasons why we wanted to light up the workforce system, because there's so much there that's already being done.
I think it's very essential to add that component, but just the non-judgmental way that we've been talking about, putting the humanistic part back in a person and not looking at their past to define who they could be, is one of the most essential trauma-informed care trainings that we offer as well, you know, because it is so important that that piece is there before you enter in trauma-informed. What is the trauma that's actually happened to this person, but how do we realize and leverage the fact that it's available for anybody? Trauma is there, lived trauma is there for everybody. Vicarious trauma is there for everybody. Segregation and all those kind of things that the demands on the world and the workforce puts on people is traumatic, you know, even as women, traumatic lifestyles inside of engaging in a man's world, inside of a, you know, so it's just so much to do. Again, it's that bite-sized morsel that you want to take that's specific to what you're asking about, that's going to help you to identify and do your job better, or to be more informed yourself about the kind of people that you're dealing with that's coming through your doors. And some of them is right on your staff. Some of them sit right on your boards. Some of them, you know, live right in your house. And sometimes that person is you. You know, how could I be more informed about my trauma that I cover up every day? You know, masked up and dressed up and messed up in the inside because I haven't dealt with my trauma, right? Other things that happen, you know, so that kind of thing. So I love that. I love that that even came up as a question. Only thing that I never like about that, because it became a buzzword so much that everybody kept just saying it. Trauma informed, trauma informed, trauma informed. What kind of trauma are you informed on? You know, that becomes very traumatic within itself. But yeah, we're here to help any way we can. And if you guys have anything that you want to throw our way at that you believe that will be helpful for us to learn more about what you do and the gaps that you need help with, as well as the gaps that we may not be looking at in what your roles are as the workforce development.
Okay. Got one more question. And if we could keep it to like a minute, because I want to make sure we wrap up. I saw someone here said, are there examples of effective training businesses, social enterprises, worker groups that provide a safe space for employment, work history, and good earnings? I know that's a loaded one. We probably have to come back to that one. Yeah. Yeah, we'll come back to you with that answer, Jack. I know that was from you. So going to wrap it up now.
Pardon me, Amber. May I quickly answer William Clay's question in the Q&A?
Sure.
He wanted to know, how can the plight of human trafficking rise to the level of hunger, homelessness, things like that. Milwaukee has lived this question because, again, when we started, there were crickets. It was just the same old story, but it was with education. And just continuing, we had our bags, we will travel. So just with the information, the truth of what we knew about human trafficking, we would take that information, and where we were invited to go, we would share. We would share. We would share. And it just continued to move. There were counties that were saying, oh no, do you know how many bedrooms are in most, just, it was crazy what we were experiencing, the prejudices, the judgment, things like that. And that's because of the narrative. So when you take the truth and you just have the conversations, and they have conversations, but you're passing along the truth, that cream is going to rise to the top. So Milwaukee is Wisconsin is now a perfect example of starting with nothing. And now we have a statewide task force. We know that human trafficking is in all 72 counties. We have systems that were not paying attention to it, now having, I'm going to say, task force within a task force, just programs so that they can learn more, so that they can be more effective. Medical systems, colleges, children's hospitals, so on and so forth. So just work with the truth and continue to share along the way. It will grow. It's not a sprint. It's indeed it's a journey, not a sprint.
Well, we are at time. I just want to thank each of the panelists for providing their time and their expertise and just helping with planning this whole thing. All of the information has truly been invaluable. To all that have attended, thank you guys for taking time out of your day and in the midst of all that's going on to join us in our first official Zoom. And our apologies for some of the technical difficulties, but as we continue to do these, we'll get better. So just apologies in advance. But we will be sending out some more information. So we have gone through and we have looked through and found organizations who specifically help those who have been trafficked. And we got those for each of the cities that's in our consortium. So we will be sharing that with you, so you at least have a basis to start with when you begin to plan out and strategize how is it that you want to be able to provide and help provide resources for people that have been trafficked. We also will be sending out a survey. So if you could please take a moment when you receive it to fill it out, provide your honest feedback about if it's any more content that you want, as well as I'll give you contact information for if you want to connect with any of the panelists here. I'll be able to share their contact information with you, and I'm sure they will be more than happy to be able to provide some assistance and just some resources too to help you begin to plan this out with your staff, especially those case managers. And also your executive teams about how to do this. So again, thank you so much for attending. And we do have a couple more coming up. So just be on the lookout for more Zoominars on a bunch of different topics. So thank you again all.